my eye. Through the mist, my surprise shone light from distant northern skies. At that point, I realized I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's okay. If this is all an illusion, then I'm willing to play.
Welcome to the Quantum Guide Show, interviews with awakened masters as they share their quantum work with you. The Quantum Guide Show is produced by Karen Holton, creator of the 9 Steps to Quantum Health Transformation, a free 9-step online course to give you the tips and resources you need to thrive. Karen lost and continues to keep off 178 pounds of surplus body weight as she made her dreams come true. Whether you are awakening to the ascension process or simply want a wiser, more efficient lifestyle, this program is for you. No strings attached. The Quantum Guide Show is brought to you in part by Zendome's Orgonite, Karen's unique brand of orgone generators, ethically sourced, handmade, and double charged for maximum effect. Find out how orgone generators work and what they can do for you. Don't be fooled by imitations. Check out Karen's current selection, only available from her website, KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Quantum Health Transformation. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to the Quantum Guide Show. Today in episode 70, my returning guest is Dave Petrella. Dave is an astrologer, biologist, spiritual guide, and Oak Island theorist. He has traveled to all 50 states and most of Canada doing research. Dave has studied world religion extensively, along with Eastern medicine, metaphysics, and topics related to extraterrestrial intelligence. In this episode, Dave shares with us some of his latest research. He went on a 10-day research trip in April that included meeting and spending time with William Henry. For those of you who aren't familiar with William Henry, he's a mythologist and he's also a star, the star of Ancient Aliens. And Dave attended a 2-day conference on Ascension Teachings in Nashville, Tennessee. It included 9 states and 5 mound builder sites. We're going to learn a little bit more about that today. Dave is available for teaching, birth charts, relationship matching, spiritual guidance, and many other topics. And he is available on Facebook, Instagram, and by email. And the links will be posted below in the description. Be sure to check out Dave's monthly show, the last Friday of each month, called East of Astrology on the Tessacan Network. Welcome back, Dave, to the Quantum Guide Show. How are you doing?
Hey, Karen, thanks for having me back. I'm great. How about you?
I'm good. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your show? It's coming up. This gets published on Thursday, and then your show's right away on Friday. What can people expect?
Sure. Well, please come join us. It's going to be on the Experiencer Support Association YouTube channel, also known as TESSA, but type in Experiencer Support Association, you'll find the channel. It's the last Friday of every month, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and we do different topics from the ancient world. And so this Friday, I'm going to be covering dimensions, and actually Karen is going to be my guest for the show, and we're going to be covering dimensions from different angles, pun intended, because actually that's kind of how part of how dimensions work, but in terms of angles of light and quantum angles and entanglement and stuff like that. So anyway, Karen's going to be joining me, and we're going to be going over a few different models and sharing ideas and just kind of getting a discussion going. I welcome input. Anyone who has questions or they want to add something, please feel free to do that.
Sure, and it's thank you for that, Dave. And it's a live show, so you can join in the live chat and participate. And Dave and Ryan will do their best to answer your questions. And then there's even an after chat, which is always a lot of fun, where we sort of talk about how the show went and different things like that. So I really encourage everybody to join us. And thank you for having me as your guest on Friday, Dave. It's awesome. So what can you tell us about the Builder Mounds?
Great. Well, first of all, I want to say people probably know by now, if they've seen some of my shows and things, that I'm a scientist. So when I'm collecting information, I mean, you can read endless amounts of books, you can watch YouTube videos, you can talk with people. But when it comes to, if I have an opportunity to get out into the field and actually go to some of these places that I'm researching and meet with people in person, then that's going to really take, it really takes the cake. That's that you're pulling primary source information, and in terms of supporting evidence to draw conclusions from, it's really your best bet. You have to actually get out there and collect the data. So in any case, I've been doing a lot of research on the what's called the mound builder civilization, and for most people probably have heard of them as the Mississippian culture. It was essentially, a lot of people claim, the first native culture in the Americas. There's obviously, all kinds of ways people can debate that. I'm open to talking about that, but it's kind of like a lot of people, especially on the eastern, well, actually it is kind of confined to the eastern. So basically, it's a large mound builder civilization. These are what are called earthen mounds. It's built out of essentially soil and clay and small rocks, and it's shaped into a form that it's going to kind of last. And so essentially it goes from the very, very eastern side of Oklahoma down to the very far eastern side of Texas, maybe halfway down Texas, and then kind of up on the same longitude line, and then over to the east, fair distance, at least to like West Virginia, United States, and to Georgia, United States, and even into Florida. There's some mounds in Florida, United States. So this was a very expansive culture. Oh, and by the way, there's also some up in Ontario. The ones I know of, I think, are on the Minnesota border. So it did extend at least partly into Eastern Canada. So this was a huge civilization, and it's kind of a big mystery about who were they, what did they do, where did they come from, what did they believe, and all kinds of things like this.
Mhm.
So, I went out and I went to 4 of the largest sites on the eastern seaboard, essentially. And I did firsthand research. I was out there with a pen and paper, and I'm writing down things that have to do with astrology and the solstices and equinoxes. You take note of elevation and how high everything is. You want to pay attention to all the numbers when you go out into the field. So we can actually bring up the slide show, Karen,
Sure.
if you have that, and I'll start to kind of go through the main sites that I went to. And so while you're getting that, Karen, the first place that I stopped was in East Texas, and it's called the Caddo Mounds, Caddo. And it's essentially the furthest south, and effectively, I believe, for the most part, the furthest west. There's a large line of them across kind of the western edge, which, like I said, it kind of lines up with eastern Oklahoma, but it's the furthest southwest mound in the Americas that have to do with the civilization. So it's fairly important. It's actually some of the questions you begin to ask is, okay, why did they stop here? Why didn't they continue going further south? What is all that about? So I think we can probably go to the first picture, Karen. It should be the Caddo Mound site. I don't believe I have an actual, yep, excellent. So I don't have an actual picture of the mound at this one. And the reason for that is because something I kind of developed along the way is because it was actually out of respect. I had my camera, I could take pictures and everything, but it's very important, especially when you're entering ancient sites in native land, that you go in with respect. You really, you're a visitor. You don't know what kind of energy is there. You have to be careful about that too. And just in general, you know, I didn't want to, so to speak, desecrate anything. I didn't want to be disrespectful. So beginning of my trip, I wasn't really taking pictures of the actual mounds. And then I'll tell you what happened that changed my mind about that as we go on this presentation here. So yeah, like I said, this is in a town called Alto, Texas. It's very eastern Texas, United States. The Camino Real actually ran through this area. And so essentially it was missionaries, it was natives, it was traders, I guess, well, I wouldn't say colonists, but early Europeans. Everyone kind of traveled this trail, and it's really, you know, well established. It's been, I think it went from Mexico up to, I think at least through Louisiana, but it was pretty large trail. And so the interesting thing about this site, apart from the fact that everyone was going through this area, and a lot of them were describing what they saw. They said, we saw these mounds. We saw like a flat platform. We didn't really know what it was. And, you know, that's kind of how it always goes. As you show up, people don't even know what they're looking at. We don't know where these things came from, how long ago they were established. And so as I came into this site, one of the first things that was of interest to me, and I didn't know at first the reason, but all along the road, the trees had been really ravished. All of the upper branches were missing. It was basically just a lot of them just tree trunks. Some of the tree trunks were snapped in half. So I had an idea of what I thought that was. And then when I got to the visitor center, it was confirmed that actually a pretty large tornado had actually cut through that area a few years back. I think maybe 2019 or 2018. And that's one of the other things you really want to take note of when you go to sites is, what is the natural world like in this area? Are there tornadoes? Are there hurricanes? How much rain are they getting? And that all will inform reasons why people decide to settle. One of the things that you always need to have is a fresh water source. So I believe there were, actually I know for a fact, there was a spring right on site. It said like the old spring or the old well. It's that you need to establish your water source really first. That's essentially the most important thing. You need to have fresh water. If you don't have that, then nothing else is going to function. So I got in the visitor center. I talked with the nice lady in there, and she had told me about the tornado. And this one's a fairly large site, Karen. So I was pretty surprised about it, but I was actually really delighted because this was the first day of my trip. It was exciting to kind of get it kicked off. And they had a golf cart actually available for use because the site is fairly large. And so in order to maximize the time that you can spend at the different parts of the site, you just essentially drive along the path. You see the kind of the dirt path there, that was one of the golf cart paths. So I was able to do it fairly quickly, but you know, not rushing, of course, not rushing. And this site has one really large ceremonial mound that was partly destroyed, I believe, by farming on the other side of the road. You can't actually access it because I think it's on private land, but you can see it from the main site. And it used to be a lot taller, and it was kind of maybe cut in half, kind of leveled off. And, you know, so again, we don't have the full information about that, but it's pretty large. I mean, they were up at least probably 50, I'd say at least 50 feet, maybe 50, 60 feet originally on the top of that mound. And of course, the higher up you get, something that's really important to pay attention to is that you want to get high so that you can see the sun, the movement of the sun, the movement of all the heavenly bodies and the moon. And then also the other reference is that the higher up you are, the closer to the creator you are, or to God, or however you want to call the creator, because you're literally closer to the heavens if you're up off the land. So that was on the other side of the road, and then there's what's called a burrow pit, kind of at the far side of the site, and that's where you can see where they actually dug into the land and took all of the clay and the dirt and then transported it to build these mounds. There's a huge depression, like a really big depression. You can see how much soil they actually took out of it. So that was really cool to see that. In the central plaza area, there was another. Really, it was pretty small. I mean, I think it had probably been altered as well, but maybe 3 to 5 feet tall, very flat. They seem to think that people kind of met there. Maybe some of the ceremonies happened there, or the socialization happened there in the plaza. One of the things that I was thinking immediately, and I know a lot of people don't go there with this, but you really should if you want to see the full story of humanity, because there is a large extraterrestrial question when you're talking about natives. A lot of them still commune with the spirits. They still commune with extraterrestrials, especially out in the Southwest. And you know, they never had a problem with them. They work together, and it's something I know that's important to you to talk about and bring awareness to, and I agree too. So I had thought, I'm like, well, what if this was like a landing pad area? Because I don't see what else you would do on here. It's like, it's only 3 feet higher than the surrounding ground. Why not just meet on the regular level ground? Why do you have to build a platform that's like 3 feet high? It's almost no difference in height. That's one of the things I was thinking. I'm like, if you happen to be an extraterrestrial civilization, you're obviously up high and you can see the landscape really well. So that when you come down to visit, you want to know where to land. And if the people who you're communing with, for instance, in this case, the natives, you want to make a designated area so that they feel welcome. It's a place that's a sacred place. You know, you want to make it stand out from the rest of the land. So that's one of the things that was really on my mind as I was going through this particular site. And then around the other side of the site is what's called the burial mound. There's actually only one burial mound at this site. And there were, you know, quite a few burials in there. I think maybe up to 60 or 70. And I think a lot of it was excavated. But, you know, very, very neutral energy at the site. I was kind of surprised by that because oftentimes at native sites, they're very, very heavily charged in terms of energetically. So everything was pretty peaceful. I was very surprised by that. I was very ready if I had to, you know, move into some higher energy, kind of spiritual, metaphysical things. And at this particular site, that there was really none of that. You know, I go into the sites to making sure I'm balanced physically and mentally as well. But even so, even sometimes when I'm physically and mentally balanced, there's some stuff in there energetically that's can be kind of difficult. But no, not at this site. Very, very calm, peaceful site. And just wrap up with this site. They're rebuilding the visitor center because that was destroyed by the tornado, believe it or not. And so I wasn't able to go and see any exhibits because they didn't exist anymore. And they're also working on getting back up the original Caddo Hut, which is a really, really beautiful structure. Obviously, it's all natural materials from the land. You've got rushes and stuff, and you've got sticks and all kinds, probably of moss, and really, really beautiful. Of course, circular hut because the natives believe, and I do too, you know, believes in the circle as the most balanced shape. Of course, that's the shape of the zodiac, and everyone knows I do astrology. It's also a circle. So I think that's mostly it for that site. It was a nice area to kick off the day. A beautiful sunny day, as you guys can see here, and just really, really peaceful.
Nice. Should I go on to the
Okay,
next slide?
Yep. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, Karen. Yep. Okay, so now this site, what I did is I drove through northern Louisiana. I chose secondary routes because I like to see different areas. You know, I've been on the interstate so many times, and I like a more laid back approach, and I like to see the small towns and everything. Really, the small towns is generally where you're going to find a lot of the old way of life preserved, and I really respect a lot of the old traditions. So I don't need to see highways. You know, I don't need to see all the modernization. I prefer the pastoral. So I drove through northern Louisiana all the way to the Mississippi River, which is essentially where Louisiana borders Mississippi. This is the very, very northeast corner of Louisiana, and this site is called Poverty Point. Now, Poverty Point is effectively the oldest earthen structure in, let's say United States at this point, probably potentially North America, but I think it's safe to say United States. And it's a very large area. It was very, very highly developed, and you know, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It's just surrounded by farm fields and everything. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so it's obviously, you know, gotten a lot of attention through the years. And not a lot of people there. It was a pretty relaxed day. and a very, very large site. And I did not have a golf cart this time. So I ended up spending, I think I was there for at least 4 hours, potentially 5 hours. It was a long, long time. And, I went in, I watched the movie, of course, the kind of intro movie. I saw some of the exhibits, what they found in the area. And then I went out and I started on the site, walking essentially. And it was marked pretty well. It's numbered with signs and everything. And then it tells you a little bit about the specific sites. So I went out there. Again, really nice day. Thankful for that. If it wasn't, I always am ready. I have an umbrella if I need it. If it's lightning, then I'm in my car. Inside. I'm not going to go out. It's dangerous to do research like that. So this site, very, very large. It's essentially on a bluff that overlooks, I believe it's a tributary of the Mississippi River. Mississippi River used to be a lot larger, and it used to travel much greater of an area, especially like east to west, let's say. And so the small tributary of the river below this bluff where the site is, this mound site is located, Poverty Point, is probably used to be potentially the actual edge of the original Mississippi River. And now it's all floodplain, and it will seasonally flood and stuff like that. But you really have to think about, how has the land changed? Why did they build their site here and not on the banks of the Mississippi? Well, if the banks of the Mississippi used to be where the tributary ends, then that would be the reason. It was on the banks of the Mississippi, I believe, and then the river path has changed. And that would probably potentially very likely be the reason for that. So anyway, making notes of that, it was nice to be up a little higher off the river on the bluff there. And this site in particular, it has a very large mound at the central portion of the site. It's a 72-foot tall mound, very, very prominent. You can see it probably from at least 5 miles away. I was going to say maybe even 10 miles. There's some trees in the way. It's kind of hard to see it on the approach, but it really sticks out. You can really see there's something kind of special there. So I walked around to the back side of the site kind of to begin with, and all of these mounds towards the back, there's really kind of 3 of them. The central one is a 72-foot tall one, which, by the way, it's a very important number astrologically, because 72 is every 72 years, the great year or the precession actually slips 1 degree. So every 72 years, you move 1 degree through the age, whichever particular age you're in. And then after you do that 30 times, then you have moved 2,160 years all the way through an entire age. So 72 is a very, very important number. I'm certain they knew it. Of course, the visitor center doesn't talk about it because the people don't, the archaeologists don't really know that. Why is 72 an important number? It's also a multiple of 12. All these things are in there. So again, I didn't want to be disrespectful, but it said there's a staircase that goes up the top to the top of the mound, the central mound. So, it's obviously for people to walk up. Before I started to head up there, I still wanted to be respectful. So, I just kind of just said, is it okay that I do whatever spirits are in the area? Is it okay with you guys that I walk up? You always want to ask, even if you don't say anything. And, there was no protest or anything. So I walked up. It's pretty high, and it's kind of interesting because it's not a conical mound like the other ones at the previous site in Texas. This one actually was in the shape of a bird, very, very large bird. And you can actually kind of see you see the main wingspan, and then you can actually even see where they've made tail feathers in the back. And then the very end of the tail kind of flutes out as well. It's really, really beautiful. I mean, if you were to see it from above, you could see this was in the shape of like an effigy mound. It's the shape of an animal, of a bird. And it looks, effectively looks east, which is towards the rising sun. There's some other potential mounds that, a couple of them I couldn't access because it's not part of the site. I think it's on private land. But anytime you're talking about east, you're talking about the rebirth, you're talking about the rising sun every morning. You really want to look, if you're looking in the northeast, you're going to be looking at the summer solstice sunrise point. If you're looking to the southeast, it's the winter solstice sunrise point. And then, of course, you're looking directly east, roughly, that's going to be your solstice, your spring solstice, your spring equinox point. So if you're at the top of this mountain, you're looking relatively east. you want to make note of structures up to the northeast, directly east, and then all the way to the southeast. And if you see something there, and if you can kind of get a sight line with your eyes, then generally that's the idea, is that, okay, so they also wanted to mark where the sun is, obviously, you know, on the solstices and equinoxes and everything like that. And some of them, like this site in particular, it focuses on the eastern direction. Some sites will focus on the western direction. If they do that, it's more often has an association with the afterlife or with death. So it's nice to see, you know, for me, I teach Ascension. So I like seeing things pointing towards the east. The east is the direction of the power. That's when the growth is happening, the birth is happening, and all those wonderful things. So again, very large site. There's probably 5 or 6 ridges before you get to this large mound at the back of the site. And the ridges were really, this whole site was very wet. There was a huge storm that came through. So my boots were completely soaked by the end of this. I could not help but stepping in the puddles. And they believe people lived along these ridges or these rings at some point. There were other associations with different points with the sun and with the moon at minimum. But they had supposedly different sections. There was an industrial section along these ridges. There was a residential section. But you can see it's a huge, huge arc. If people pull up the site map, you'll see what I'm talking about with these ridges. So anyway, I walked through the woods. I kind of came around the other side, and it's the whole site's not entirely developed. Some of it's still very, very natural. But you know, again, very surprised at how large. A huge area, and a very large central plaza, which is where you would have had your communal events, you know, possibly some of the sacred ceremonies and things. And towards the end of this walk, there was a mound that actually, this is really interesting, Karen. There was a mound that actually had eroded so much that it was slipping down into the tributary of the Mississippi, and half of the mound is gone because of erosion. I guess natural erosion, because it was right on the edge of that bluff. And when that bluff collapsed into the tributary, then half of the mound went with it. So, you know, natural changes certainly change sites, as well as human changes that either come from farming, usually from farming, or just, you know, if you don't want, I mean, some people just don't want that stuff on their land, so they'll just kind of like dismantle it, and then that's the end of that. So this site was it's a really big site, very well-known site. I believe it goes as far back as potentially 1700 BC, which I think is the oldest, according to traditional archaeology, dated Mississippian site in America. And that's one of the things that makes it really important. So supposedly this might have been one of the origin points for the Mississippian culture. But again, very, very, very mellow, neutral energy at this site. I didn't feel any spikes. I didn't feel anything strange. You know, there's obviously lots of death happened at the site, you know, for various reasons. I didn't feel anything like that, nothing bad. I actually didn't feel anything at all. Kind of strange. It was kind of strange. It was like it just completely abandoned, and all of the energy was taken with it, you know, off the site is what it felt like to me. So that was Poverty Point, again, northeastern Louisiana, oldest Mississippian mound site. And then I think we can go to the next one, Karen. Did you want to comment or add anything? Or
no, but I would like you to repeat again how old they estimate this site was. How many years ago?
1700 BC is the number.
Okay, good to know. That's a long time ago.
It is, but and I was very glad to see the alignments. Obviously, they know what they were talking about. It makes me feel kind of at home, which is pretty rare, especially in the United States, because of what I teach. You don't see, there's not a lot of examples of these things. And let me mention this too before I forget, because this is very important.
Okay.
At the end of my research trip, the feeling that I got was that this was a very, very, very large civilization. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of mounds across specifically the Midwest United States and into the South and everything. There's so many that are not labeled. There's so many on private land. It's just, you know, people know it was from a previous culture. So many have not been excavated and everything. But at the end of my trip, the overwhelming feeling that I got was that the mound builders, it seems like, I believe that at some point they did have brothers and sisters that were part of the Mayan culture, specifically, potentially the Aztec culture. It felt closer to Mayan to me. And as we know, the Mayans, they were really just on the other side of the Gulf of Mexico. It's not that far. And if you're in a Gulf, I mean, at least when the weather's not really severe, it's kind of protected from the ocean. It's not right on the ocean. It's part of a more like placid water body area. So, and all you would have had to do actually, if you left the Yucatan Peninsula, I mean, you could literally hit Florida in no time. Florida's very close to the edge of the Yucatan, or you could go up along the Mexico side and you'd be right in Texas. So to me, it's like, yeah, of course, I know that they explored it. And I think maybe some people decided to settle in what is today the United States instead of staying on the Yucatan, which is today's Mexico. But it's all in the same region. But the thing that I really got from this is it felt like a watered down version of the Mayan culture. That's really what it felt like to me. They're not dealing in stone like the Mayans were. It's all earthen. It's all clay and dirt and like thatching and stuff like that, natural products. I think largely because that's what was available in the new area, what's the United States today. And I think they had more stones and quarries and stuff and on the Yucatan where they could build in stone, but you have to work with the local material. A lot of the mythologies have a lot of similarities to what you might find with the Mayans. And it's just really interesting because you can see that there's a relation, but it feels like it was less developed. And that's what I came away with. And like I said, these sites that I went to, I didn't really feel a lot of spiritual energy, if at all, which was very strange to me. I don't really know how to explain that, but that's my experience. And I pick up on all kinds of energy. I'm very sensitive to energies. So, no, it felt like nothing ever happened there. It's kind of weird. So anyway, I just want to say that because it's related somehow to Mesoamerica, but it was, I think, some of the people that went into the outlying lands and they said, okay, let's start the culture here. We're going to do it our own way, but we're going to keep a few of the things from like the Mayans or from the Aztecs. So I just want to get that out there. It's important to kind of note that.
Dave, I just have one more quick question, and that is how, in comparison to you said this was basically 11, sorry, how old again was the site?
1700 BC.
1700 BC. When was the Mayan and the Aztec Empire? What period of time?
Well, let's see. I mean, fairly recently. I'm trying to remember. I'm probably going to misquote this. The Mayans, I thought they kind of lasted up until the Spanish conquest, which was in roughly the 1500s, I want to say. I encourage people to look that up. Don't take my word for it. But,
but when was it estimated? When was it estimated that it started? When it was at its.
Yeah, actually, I do know the Mayans, at least. The Mayans, what was it? 12. I think it was around 1200 BC, because that's
so around the same time period as this.
Within 5, yeah, actually, and even the archaeologists estimate that Poverty Point anywhere between 1700 BC and I think I saw up to 1300 BC. So it's kind of a bracket. So they're estimating a similar bracket, but to be honest, Karen, I don't even really know what I believe about timelines anymore. And there's even a lot of metaphysical explanations that a lot of scientists aren't even willing to go into that area. That could possibly explain how some of these people moved across the land. The Mayans themselves supposedly disappeared like almost overnight. And I guess their ancestors said that, yeah, they went back to the Pleiades. And people are like, well, that's ridiculous. And, to me, it's not, because wormholes are real. You can have a craft that comes down and takes the people and takes them back to their homeland. All of these things, to me, are within the realm of possibility. in addition to, yeah, okay, if natural resources ran dry, I get that. If you didn't have water anymore or the hunting grounds weren't fertile, yeah, of course, people move along. There's wars and stuff. But, you know, again, as a good scientist, you don't want to just say it was that, then let's forget about the UFOs and let's forget about wormholes. You know, no, for me, it's no, let's include every possibility and keep it in the back of your mind until you might need it one day. And then also realize that the ancient world was a lot more magical than the current world. They had, I believe they lived with other species and other extraterrestrial species. I believe they lived with, you know, more like with ghosts and demons and stuff like that, and all kinds of things were around. And I think a lot of them were physical. We just don't see that as much anymore, but I believe it used to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, in any case, and the thing too that's interesting is that when I study ancient history, if it's not before 1500 BC, I don't really pay a lot of attention to it. And I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just saying that the original teachings were watered down so much and to such a really horrifyingly bad extent that it's very hard to pull not traditional, it's really hard to pull original teachings from something that happened after 1500 BC, because then humans started to take it, they manipulated it on purpose, in some cases, they forgot it in other cases. But if you go back to some of the oldest texts we have, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead, 1500 BC, I feel good about that. I feel good about what's in that text. If you go later than that, I start to feel not as good about it. And it's, you know, it's not me doing it. It's just what I'm pulling from the text. Okay, so that was Poverty Point. That was my second stop. Then what I did is I drove across the Mississippi River. Very, very, very large, powerful river. If people haven't seen it before, it's the main tributary of the eastern United States. You know, it starts up in Minnesota, essentially, goes all the way down, empties into the Gulf of Mexico, in Louisiana, and you know, main travel route, still a main travel route. Very, very powerful energetically, obviously, very wide. Pretty shocking how wide the river is. So across the Mississippi River into Natchez, Mississippi, which is actually where the Natchez Trace starts. Now the Natchez Trace is it's an old road that the natives used to use to move between their different lands, and also was used for trade. It was used by missionaries. It's kind of a similar idea to the Camino Real in a certain sense. So this road, it's been developed into a scenic road now, and it's, I think, 400 miles long, a very long road, goes from Natchez, Mississippi, all the way up through the very northwestern corner of Alabama, and then into Tennessee. It actually ends in Nashville, which of course was where the conference was. That was the reason for, really the core reason for my entire trip, was this conference in Nashville. And so I took my time along this road. Very, very beautiful. I mean, the colors, Karen, were just like vibrant greens, and it was the beginning of springtime, so all the new shoots were coming up. The grass is beautiful, all the new leaves on the trees, all just really, really nice. And you know, I camped along that, and I guess the second day or the third day on the Natchez Trace, second day, yeah, probably the second day. And by the way, there's more mounds along this trail. And actually one of the largest ones is called Emerald Mound. Extremely impressive. It's in the middle of nowhere. It just pops up. It's like, you know, you've got a few houses on the hills around it, and then suddenly this huge mound, which you can't even see because it's all surrounded by trees. So that's a really prominent one too, Emerald Mound. That's worth going to if people are on the Natchez Trace. That was very impressive. So let's see. I went up through Alabama, and then the picture that you guys are seeing right here, this picture is actually from Tennessee. And as you're starting to get up in the northern parts of especially Alabama and southern Tennessee, it gets pretty rocky. It gets a little bit more raw, I would say, and there's lots of waterfalls. And I just kind of pulled over to the side and took a few pictures. And this one in particular, I had to hike down quite a steep hill, maybe 300, 400 feet down, and it kind of went straight down. It's, you know, you really want to grab onto the railings. A little bit dangerous getting down there, but the path was paved and improved. So, some of the things I do too, it's not all research. Sometimes I just like to sit next to a waterfall, and the air was really clean. Actually, it's really cold that day. We had a cold front that came through. So I was completely bundled up. I had my winter hat on and my winter jacket and everything. And then the next day was warm again, so really a transition time between the seasons in early April. So this was in Tennessee, like I said, and then of course the Trace ends in Nashville. And I'm not going to talk a lot about the conference because I want to focus on the mound builders at this point, but I did stay outside Nashville for 2 nights. The conference, of course, was with William Henry, who's really very well known from Ancient Aliens. He's been on since the beginning of the show back in, I think, 2013. And he just did a phenomenal presentation. He's a very, very brilliant man. He's a very kind guy. I had a chance to sit down with him one-on-one. We talked for, I would say, over an hour between the different lunch breaks we had and then towards the end of the conference. And I highly, highly recommend people go and check out his work. Like I said, he's on Ancient Aliens. I believe his website's williamhenry.net. Go check out what he's doing. He's a prolific author as well and mythologist. And he's just, he's really, really tuned in. I think he's really got it right. From my perspective, he's got it really, really close to the exact truth about how some of our history happened. And he's just phenomenal. I really can't recommend him enough to people, especially when it comes to ascension, topics of ascension. He's been teaching it for at least 20 years, probably more. And he's written books. He's been writing books for over 20 years. I think his first book was in 1996, Karen. So he's really been at it for a long time. So
Dave, I just want to let you know that we only have about 10 minutes left. I'm not trying to rush you. I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, we can go to the next slide then, Karen.
Okay, this is beautiful though. What a beautiful spot.
Yep.
Oh, that looks like you just went to Rome.
Yep. So this is in Nashville. This is a replica of the Parthenon that was built for an exposition that Nashville had, I think, in the late 1800s. And it's really striking because there's actually a full-scale model of the goddess Athena inside of this temple, just like it was in Greece. And she's huge, absolutely massive statue. They gilded part of it with real gold foil. It's elaborately painted. It's elaborately decorated. And you walk into the forum and I mean, this statue is, I think, close to 40 feet tall. It's very large. Wow. And in her hand, she's got, I think he was considered a god or a demigod, but called Nike. And I believe that's where the brand Nike comes from, is from the Greek mythology. And so she's got Nike in her hand, and he looks tiny, but he's actually 6 feet tall. And it gives you a really good perspective. You're standing there in front of the statue. And the thing that I couldn't help but think, and it's very similar to Caddo Mounds. So I was thinking, I'm like, all right, I think that the Greek gods came down to commune with the Greek people. And I think there were designated areas that they met. And I think in some of these cases, they met in the temples. And I believe that, and she's not the only one. In fact, many of the gods are described as being very tall. Even in Canada with the Mi'kmaq culture, you've got Glooskap. He was described as being 40 feet tall. There's a huge statue of him on the side of the highway when you're headed into Halifax. I've seen that. So, and you ask the people, it's like, why is this such a tall statue? And they're like, yeah, that's how tall he was. So some of the giants, Karen, that you talk about, you can talk about giants that are 10 feet tall. There were also giant gods that were 40 feet tall and probably taller. I've heard some of the angels are 100 feet tall.
Yep.
So in any case, it was really impressive, and I really highly encourage people to go check that out if you're in Nashville. It's well worth your time. We can move to the next slide, Karen, if you don't mind. And so when I left Nashville, there was actually a tornado warning. There was a lot of really heavy weather that moved in, so I actually stayed an extra day in Nashville. And then when I left Nashville, I actually went up to what's called the Cahokia Mounds. Now, the Cahokia Mounds, this is just east of St. Louis. It's actually in Illinois. It's in a very, very industrial area. It's pretty shocking that this used to be a sacred site, because now it's just surrounded by I mean, there's a trash site with they actually piled up trash, and it actually looks like one of the mounds, but it's not. It's just trash. And I was looking in the distance, and I'm like, why haven't I seen this site on the map? It turns out it's a trash dump just to the other side of it. But this one, of course, is the original site. And people use this site now for a lot of recreation. There's people go out there with their families. I saw a lot of people jogging and taking their dogs for walks. And this is a very large staircase in front of what's called the Monk's Mound. Now, this is the largest Mississippian mound in North America. And this one's 100 feet tall, right at 100 feet, which again is a very, very important number numerologically and spiritually. Essentially, you can identify 100, really 99 or 100. They both symbolize God, or the top of heaven, however you want to look at that. So, I walked up the center of this. You can see the city of St. Louis, which is maybe 10 miles away off to the west. You can see the Gateway Arch, if you're familiar with that, if you've seen that on the banks of the Mississippi before. Really, really great vantage point being up that high. And this site was very large too. I walked across most of it. I only had a couple hours that morning, but I did get to see a lot of it. Again, there's a burial site. I was surprised because there was sacrifices that happened. And again, and I'm saying human sacrifices. And again, I didn't feel any energy that was off really in any way. I was very surprised by that, but that's what I felt. And then also at this site, just a couple of the other things, it was the back of this mound. This was probably my highlight for me. I walked around the back of this mound, and it was not very developed. I mean, not really even a trail, how I cut through it. So I was walking through high grasses and everything. And there was a beautiful family of deer at the back of this cairn. It was probably 7 to 10 deer, and they were just laying, underneath some of the bushes and shrubs, and very peaceful. And I guess they weren't expecting me to come, but and I was not sneaking up on them, but they kind of reacted and kind of walked or ran off into the distance a little bit. But they only went like 75 feet away from me, and then they all looked back, and I just kind of thanked them for being stewards of nature and for keeping my hope alive for the world. Just to see something so natural and beautiful, it was really rejuvenating. And then the other thing at the site I just want to mention before we go to the last slide is there's what's called like a wood henge. And so towards the western side of the site, they had these really large trees that they put in post holes in order to measure the sun, the solstices, equinoxes, what time of the year you're at. So when I see things like this, it really supports the teachings out of the ancient world. And it's so important to see that these things, they don't stand alone in time. I mean, when you go over to the UK, Ireland and Britain today, you're going to see similar, they used to have post holes, and they have lots of mounds over there too. Very, very interesting. In fact, I actually think the Welsh might have something to do with, and the Welsh and the Irish, the ancient peoples, might have something to do with why we have these mounds in North America. I think it started over there, and I think they got over here. I have no idea how that happened. I have heard a lot of theories, either ships or I think potentially portals, because the Druids were powerful. And I think they came over here, and I think they continued with their mound sites. But again, not the power you're going to find over there. This was a very, very neutral sites for energy for me. Then we go on to the last slide, Karen. And while you're bringing that up, I drove through Missouri. I drove through the capital. Oh, okay, sorry. This is the view at the top of Monk's Mound. You actually looking out, you can see St. Louis in the distance. If you see a few of those buildings. And so what I did is I drove through Missouri. I went to the Jefferson City, Missouri, which is the capital. Absolutely beautiful. The nicest Capitol building I've seen in my life. It was extremely impressive. If people have a chance to do that, definitely go to the Capitol in Jefferson City, Missouri. And then I drove all the way west across the state, kind of in the southwest direction. And we can go to I think the last slide, Karen. Is the next one the last one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I entered into Oklahoma, and the last site is called the Sphero Mound site. S-P-I-O, excuse me. Let me start again. S-P-I-R-O, Sphero Mounds. And this is the very western limit very western limit of the mound builders, the Mississippians. Pretty much in line longitudinally with Caddo Mounds, where I started my adventure. So this site, again, very, very wet. There was minor flooding. I actually cut off some of the trail I had to go around. But again, my boots were completely soaked by the end of this trip. I could not believe how much standing water was at this site. Very similar at this site. I did not feel a lot of energy. Out of all the sites, I would say I probably felt the most at this one. It was very, very hard to perceive. There was something there, but nothing, really bad or malevolent or anything like that. There is a very large, this picture is actually showing what's called the Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Craig Mound. And that was the burial mound at this site. And interestingly, it's in the southeast part of the land. The reason why that's important is because the southeast is it's the birth, but it's also the death. And so on the winter solstice, that's when the sun dies, figuratively, mythologically, and all these things, and actually technically literally, because it's the darkest day of the year. And then when you move into the southeast, which is where this site, this burial site is, the largest mounds at the site were in the southeast. There was one in the central of the site, but it was kind of destroyed by farming, so we don't really know fully how that one used to look. But anyway, off in the southeast, that's where the sun is rising again. So in terms of what they're thinking spiritually, is we're going to bury the dead in the southeast part of the site because there's hope for them. There's hope that they will rise. They are, yes, they're deceased, but they will rise as you're moving through the southeast, just like the sun rises, that they will rise to a better life, a higher spiritual experience. So that was most of the site. I walked to the center of it. There are solstice lines and equinox lines. They're kind of hard to see. A lot of the ridges have been eroded. Again, I believe part of the site was farmed, so that's some of the reason for that. And then I went on a really nice hike at the back of the site. It was extremely wet. I mean, some of the puddles were they must have been close to 5 inches deep. And I couldn't walk around it. So I said, okay, I'm already soaked, so I'm just going to go straight through it. But very peaceful in the back there. And, I felt like it was a nice energy. Out of all the sites, this one probably had the nicest energy when I went towards the back of the site, kind of off of the structures. And the last thing I'll add, because I know we're at the end of the show here, is I did have a conversation with the archaeologist inside of the visitor center, and he's been there since 1986, I think he told me. He's been the archaeologist on site, and I said, man, I'm just so impressed that you've been dedicated to this for your whole life. And we had a really good conversation. The exhibits there are excellent. Out of all of the Mississippian sites, Sphero by far had the most native artifacts out of any site, any other Mississippian site by far. And that was explained to me actually by another native, actually a Cherokee that I met in Tennessee. He said the reason for that is because it was kind of like the last attempt to preserve the Mississippian civilization before it completely collapsed. So essentially, the way that they've looked at it is that they took everything, they took all their culture and artifacts, and they went and they tried to establish it at this last site. And by the way, it's also the transition essentially between the East and the West. So if any of the tribes came up from the West, it was a really wonderful place to meet. Essentially it's right in the middle of the United States. It's very close to the center of the United States. So I think for a lot of reasons, they moved it over to the West. But it's really impressive. And actually I think in Dallas through the end of the summer, they have a Sphero Mounds exhibit of all of the artifacts that they found. And it's supposed to be very impressive. So if anyone's in that area, I would also recommend checking that out.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm just going to stop the share. That was a great presentation, a lot of information. I didn't know about any of it before. I have one last question, and that is first of all, are these mounds sort of the same time period as many of the other megalithic structures that are often found in Central America and South America? Is this a similar sort of time frame?
Well, I think a lot of the archaeologists would claim that it is, but again, I don't know. I kind of try not to incorporate timelines when I'm looking at, as much as possible when I'm looking at ancient research, because I'm trying to pull out the spiritual meaning behind it and what they were doing.
Right. Right.
And you know what, Karen, for me, it's actually a lot of times it's good enough for me just to say, you know what, this is definitely antiquity. I definitely feel a lot of respect for what they did, especially astrologically, because of course I'm an astrologer, and cosmologically too. Some of the cosmological teachings are really, really spot on that these natives had. So
Mhm.
I know it was a long time ago. I think most of the natives who are in the United States and North America today will also say that it was happened before them. So even it's before a lot of their memories. And it's really weird, Karen, because actually a lot of them don't really seem to know a whole lot about it. It's like they're still trying to figure out what happened. And
Mhm.
I'll just leave it on this final note because it's kind of cool. I talked with someone recently and they said that they were told that the mounds had there was some kind of in a relation to Atlantis, that when Atlantis sank, people came from the Atlantic and they moved across the eastern seaboard, setting up some of the civilization. And to
Mhm.
me, that's not out of the realm of possibility at all. And even a lot of the mythologies about I believe it's called Azatlan, which was supposedly the homeland for a lot of the natives in North America, was supposed to potentially be Atlantis itself. And I think that could exist anywhere. It might even be. It might have even been subducted beneath some of the continental plates. It's kind of a very interesting story. So yeah. Anyway, but 1700 BC was Poverty Point. I guess the farthest back that they would put that. It could potentially, as far as I'm concerned, it could potentially be a lot older. I'd like to, if someone ever gave me permission to go there and do science how I want to do it, I think I'd probably come up with wildly different information.
Mhm.
But I'm not mainstream, and I don't necessarily think that would be accepted. But I'm happy with what I found. Great discoveries, and the more that you can learn, when I talk about ancient history, it's like, okay, so I've been to these sites now. So when I talk about the Mississippians, I have clout because I've been there.
Mhm.
I have the information. I've been firsthand. So when I talk about the ancient world, now I can try to put it kind of where I think it belongs, which, as I said earlier, which is kind of the take home point, I believe fully that it was a kind of an outlying civilization that broke off of the Mayans. That's what I believe, if I had to really put into one sentence.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, as usual, you're a wealth of information, and I agree. Primary research is really essential, not to just rely on secondary, to actually get out there and do your own primary research. So I just have a great respect for your work, Dave. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we ran out of time. I'm sure there's lots more we could talk about on the subject. But before we go, I want to thank you very much, Dave, for joining us on the Quantum Guide Show. I'd like to thank all the viewers and remind everybody to check out Dave's show, East of Astrology, May 27th at what time, Dave?
Should be 8 p.m. Eastern time.
8
The
p.m. Eastern
experience
time.
the Experiencer Support Association YouTube channel, and feel free to participate. Also, if you guys want birth charts, if you want to talk spirituality, anything having to do with that, health tips, let me know. I think the links are in the description, right, Karen? My links?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Good,
Yep.
great.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next week on the Quantum Guide Show. Bye-bye, everybody.
See you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Quantum Guide Show. Become the change you wish to see in the world. Subscribe to Karen's YouTube channel, click the like button, and share this show with your friends. Check out Karen's website at KarenHoltonHealthCoach.com. All the links are available in the description box below. Until the next time, keep up the good work.